Every entrepreneur starts with survival. Can I just live to play another day? And then it becomes income. I want more income. I need more income. How do I get more income? And then the smart ones, it becomes, how do I increase the value of my equity?
The sad fact is that most entrepreneurs are not going to have a successful exit or successful liquidity event. And there's some that are the other side of the coin that have multiple exits.
And there's a big difference between the good ones and bad ones in that space. And the good ones can make you a ton of money, and the bad ones can cost you a ton of money.
Once you have that liquidity event as an entrepreneur, there's the press release that goes out, and then all of a sudden, your old friends from high school who forgot about you start coming out of the woodworks, and everyone wants to start talking to you. Everyone wants to interview you. Everyone wants you to invest in their deal. All right, Jim, we're back here. We're going to talk about maximizing business value.
One of my favorite topics.
This is a under talked about topic because far too often when we see entrepreneurs, they're so optimized, they're so focused on their income and just like how much money they're making and hopefully saving some of that. But they're not fully appreciating the potential equity value or enterprise value of the business that they're building underneath them.
I think the way it starts, what I've seen in my time in the business, is it starts with survival. Every entrepreneur starts with survival. Can I just live to play another day? And then it becomes income. I want more income. I need more income. How do I get more income? And then the smart ones, it becomes, how do I increase the value of my equity? Because truthfully, that's how people really get rich, is equity, not income.
Yeah, and I think it's well said, and that is so true. And just to illustrate this, in the book, we talk through an example of if you increase your profit, let's just say your EBITDA by $100,000, just a super simple example. And let's assume that in your space, businesses are worth 5 times your EBITDA, meaning that for every dollar of profit you generate, you get 5x that as your enterprise value, your equity value. So if you make an extra $100,000, then pre-tax, you made, and assuming you own 100%, you made an extra $100,000. That's great. But if the business is worth 5 times multiple, then you really $100,000 times 5, you added $500,000 to your net worth into the equity value of your business. And that's how you create the massive leverage. And that's how you create the massive liquidity event to create massive wealth, right? And it all comes through. So yes, that is really cash flow. That is profit. That is something that drives this. And you do need to prioritize it, but you also need to make sure you're really looking at it through the lens of building the value of the business.
Yeah, agreed. And also when you have a liquidity event, generally that's a capital gains event as opposed to your income, which is an ordinary income event. So you're getting a better tax bracket and you're multiplying your wealth because of that EBITDA multiple. And just think if you were at 10 times, what it would mean, right? And what if you added $1 million of income at 10 times? You just added 10 million to your net worth. And then if you sell, that's the next 10 years you're getting today at a capital gains treatment instead of working for 10 years and getting $1 million every year at an after ordinary income tax bracket.
And so we go into the book, we go through the Empire framework. So these are 6 value drivers that will help every entrepreneur just think about how they can increase the value of their business. But what I want to do here is really talk through the process of selling your business, because most entrepreneurs are fortunate if just once in their life they sell their business. The sad fact is that most entrepreneurs are not going to have a successful exit or successful liquidity event. And there's some that are the other side of the coin that have multiple exits. But in reality, this is generally, if you have a liquidity event, if you have a successful exit, it's a one and done opportunity. And as an entrepreneur, it's important to understand the process and all the steps that go into it. So I think the first place to start when we're talking through this is understanding within a rough range, what is the value of your business worth? It's really important that you first understand the value of your business or the range of outcomes that you could get, because if you're thinking about selling your business, you need to make sure you're understanding the why of selling the business. And am I getting enough money from the sale of this business? If I were to have 100% sale based off of the valuation, do I want to keep working? You just need to make sure you understand it within the context of your personal financial situation, because what you don't want to do is sell your golden goose, this business, and then realize, oh crap, I don't have enough money to be financially free. I got to go start a new business or get a job or do something else after that.
Yeah, no, very true. And doing that, there are general EBITDA multiples where you could look at based on your industry. And there's also looking at the actual transactions, which is a better number, finding out what companies are actually selling for based on their size and revenue compared to your company.
Yep. All right. So the first step is kind of just making sure you've got a ballpark of what this business could be worth and making sure that that checks the boxes for what you're trying to achieve and where you're at within your life. The next thing you're going to do is start building the M&A team. And M&A stands for mergers and acquisitions, but you want to start building the team. The first person you're going to want to really hire, which is going to be one of the most important people to hire, is going to be the investment banker. And the investment banker is going to be, think of that like a real estate agent. They're going to be the person who lists your business for sale, to go out and they sell the story. Why is your business so great? Why do other people want to buy your business? And why now is the right opportunity? So the investment banker is going to be the most important hire because they're going to be the ones who are going to be marketing and putting together the team to hopefully sell your business.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between the good ones and bad ones in that space. And the good ones can make you a ton of money, and the bad ones can cost you a ton of money.
Yep. So the second key position is going to be your M&A attorney. So you want to make sure you have an attorney or counsel who specializes in mergers and acquisitions. This person is going to review the seller purchase agreement. They're going to review the NDAs. They're going to review your LOIs, your IOIs. So they're going to be the yin and the yang with your investment banker. So think of it as your investment banker is going to try to drum up deals and opportunities and then really buyers. They're going to have different offers. Then your M&A attorney is going to represent you, and they're going to help negotiate the finer points. Because within it comes to an SPA or sale purchase agreement, there's a lot of very specific language. There's different indemnities, earnouts, escrows, and you need to make sure you've got the right counsel to really make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed.
Yeah, and this could be your one big event of your life. I mean, many entrepreneurs I know had one big liquidity event, and that was it. And if you didn't handle it right, you're not going to have a second chance.
Yep. All right. Then you're going to need a CPA or a tax advisor. This could also be the linchpin partner in your fractional family office, someone who's going to build a proactive tax plan because it's not about what you make, it's about what you keep. And so we'll talk about a few different tax planning strategies that should be thought of pre and post exit planning. And then the last expert you're most likely going to need is a QOE. Q of E is what it's oftentimes, but it stands for quality of earnings. This is someone who's going to look through your historical financial statements, normalize them to get you an adjusted EBITDA. And that's because private equity or strategic buyers understand that as small, quote unquote, small business owners, even if you're doing $100 million of revenue, you're still a small business owner. You are oftentimes running different things through your P&L that maybe a professional buyer wouldn't run through their P&L. So the quality of earnings, simply stated, just goes through and adjusts and normalizes your financial statements, what to see what a third party who were objectively maybe not putting the kids on payroll, who weren't renting the house out for 14 days a year, who weren't doing the cash balance plan or buying that private jet, what that P&L would look like if it was restated and normalized.
And this is a big reason why we preach about having a solid P&L, charter of accounts, forecasts, budgets. The tighter you can make your financials, the better you're going to look to a buyer and the less you're going to get beat on your price.
Yep. All right. So you build a team. That's step 2. Then step 3 is you need your linchpin partner, your fractional family office, to start doing the pre-sale planning. So really the 2 big buckets that this is going to, really 3 big buckets is going to fit within. The first is going to be the tax planning. So you need to make sure you have a proactive tax plan. Some things you're going to want to look at here is not only the income tax planning, but also estate tax planning. And so that dovetails naturally into wealth transfer strategies. If you need irrevocable trusts, because if you pass away with over $15 million as a single person or $30 million as a married couple, you have to pay 40% on any amount above that. So you can mitigate this by moving your business interests into different dynastic trusts or irrevocable trusts to get some of the growth out of the taxable estate. Yeah. On the income tax side, there's a few things you can do from a structuring perspective to set this business up. Section 1202 or qualified small business stock. We talk a lot about that on our podcast. That's one thing you can do to get up to 10 times your basis or $15 million tax-free. And then there's also different things you can do after the sale from an income tax planning perspective, like qualified opportunity zones. You can do different things within real estate and depreciation if you have the right fact pattern. And then you can do some leverage long short, some tax loss harvesting to offset some of the gains.
And then charitable lead trust, stuff like that also can play into that.
Yep, those are also good strategies there. And then we do go through into the book, we go through several different strategies that you should be considering. So the important part is talking through these pre-exit planning strategies ahead of the sale, because once you have that liquidity event as an entrepreneur, there's the press release that goes out, and then all of a sudden, your old friends from high school who forgot about you start coming out of the woodworks, and everyone wants to start talking to you. Everyone wants to interview you. Everyone wants you to invest in their deal. Life just becomes very, very noisy when you have a lot of money in your bank account. So the more planning you can do ahead of time while there's not as much noise is always works the best. Whereas if you're trying to scramble for doing some of this planning after the fact, A, some of this planning can't be done after the fact, but B, there's just so much more stress on your time. There's so many other people trying to get your time and your money. You just usually have analysis paralysis. You don't want to make any moves.
Yeah, well said. And when I think about it, the two riskiest time for an entrepreneur is startup, for obvious reasons, and 3 years post-exit. 3 years post-exit, I've seen millions of dollars squandered because the entrepreneur is on a high. The entrepreneur thinks all of a sudden, I'm so smart. Look how smart I am. And then they start putting money in all these startups and things that they think they're so smart and they've got figured out. And because they didn't have a plan, all these people are trying to get their money and they end up doing dumb things. And then years later, they look back and go, gosh, I was so dumb. All these investments I made that I was so smart that I lost all this money on. That's why having the plan before you have the money to invest to know where it's going, because once you have the money, it creates all these things that cloud your vision and make you susceptible to making big mistakes.
Yep, couldn't have said it better. So capital allocation decisions need to be made ahead of the transaction. You need to understand, what does your post-tax waterfall look like? There should be a waterfall that your fractional family office should build that shows the gross sales price. And then are you going to be rolling any equity into the new deal? How much is getting paid out in transaction fees, maybe phantom equity or profit interest to your team? And then how much in income taxes you're going to be paying? So then what's left for you? And then that needs to be tied into your financial plan so you understand from a cash flow perspective. If you're making, for example, $5 million of income or EBITDA, and if you're spending, most of that money and you're selling at 7, 8x, then you're going to have a math problem, right? And so you need to make sure that you really clearly visualize all of this before the deal.
And then also thinking ahead how this might impact family. How are you going to have people who are going to approach you and want money? What's going to happen? And I know I can think of one friend of mine, and he and his 2 business partners sold. It was a very public sale. So it was in the Wall Street Journal and stuff like that. And they sold to a Fortune 500 company for $250 million. Well, they had their kids who were in high school. They had never talked about how much money they had, how big the business was that they started, and they had never moved from their neighborhood. They kept driving their Hondas. They wanted the kids to go to the same, schools, and they didn't want to have them feel different or weird, so they never increased their lifestyle. Well, when that sale happened, guess what? Kids at the high school, somehow word got out, and they said their kids came home and they said, Mom and Dad, we need to have a conversation. And they said, what do you mean? You just sold your company for $250 million? And they had to have this conversation with their kids. So they were surprised because they didn't think about, they were so ingrained in getting this sale done, they didn't really think about the conversation they're going to have with their kids. And that's something you think about as an entrepreneur that may not be obvious, but think about family and how this is going to impact other people, because you may have a brother or a relative who all of a sudden wants money, and how are you going to handle that?
Yep, those really good points. And let's wrap this up by going through the specific process that an entrepreneur is going to go through. So we talked about first, you're going to build the entire team. What the team's going to do is you're generally going to want to do a sell side quality of earnings, which gets you to that adjusted EBITDA. This is going to give you a very defensible set of financial numbers and metrics. So then when a buyer comes in, we clearly understand our numbers inside and out. The next thing is your investment banker is going to build what's called a SIM, a confidential information memorandum. That's really going to be generally 50 to 100 slides, and it's going to be all about your business, what makes it great, what the future opportunities are, why everybody wants to buy it. So that's going to be built in parallel to a one-page teaser getting spit out. The one-page teaser is just to drum up a little bit of demand. Then different buyers, if they're interested, may want to sign an NDA. If they sign the NDA, they get access to your SIM. And then if they get access to your SIM, then depending from there, you want IOIs, indication of interest, or potentially you go directly to the LOI stage. But generally within the IOI phase or the LOI phase, you're going to then sign an LOI that makes you exclusive. So you have exclusive negotiations with a potential buyer. That's going to start due diligence. So that's when they're going to get full access to the data room, which means they're going to get access to all of your contracts, all of your financials, all of your employment agreements, your copyrights, your trademarks, lawsuits, your insurance documents, right? They're going to get access to every single thing. And that due diligence is going to last maybe 45 to 90 days. And that's where the negotiations really start with your M&A attorney, because The LOI is usually a 2 to 4 page piece of paper that says, here's kind of what we want to buy you for based off of our current understanding of the business. But then as they go through due diligence, the buyer's going to find potentially a lot of cobwebs or a lot of different bodies that have been buried. And that's where they may want to de-risk themselves, renegotiate different terms, different language. And that's where your M&A attorney comes into play. And then the last thing, of course, is then closing the deal and popping the bottle of champagne, assuming you survive the due diligence and you guys can continue to agree on a deal.
And it's as simple as that.
As simple as that. So that's the process. I think it's important to state that because oftentimes entrepreneurs don't really know what they don't know. And then the other thing I will say is that generally it's a 6 to 9 month process. From the first time you engage an investment banker to the time you're selling and cash is in the bank, if knock on wood, you have a successful transaction, it's 6 to 9 months. Oftentimes entrepreneurs say, oh, my business is clean, all my stuff's in order, I'm good to go, we can do this in like 3 months, right? And by far, it always takes longer than every entrepreneur expects because the due diligence period is oftentimes extended. It's usually never done on time. And then also, it's just kind of like you want to make sure you've got a good buyer pool because you want there to be demand and people to negotiate against each other. And so you don't want to just only have a buyer pool for 30 days because you want to cast as wide of a net as possible to bring in the buyers.
Yeah, you want a bidding war and one buyer is no buyer, as they say.
Yep. 100%. All right. Well, the business value is, and maximizing business value is the surest way to becoming very wealthy in the United States. And for all of our 8-9 figure entrepreneurs, obviously, if they're an entrepreneur, I guess this is a moot point, but they've created their wealth through their business. And of course, our 9-figure entrepreneurs have only gotten there through having successful liquidity events and monetizing their business. And so focusing on not just the income, but pivoting to that equity mindset and then understanding this process is so important and could be worth millions and millions of dollars.
I agree. Most important thing an entrepreneur can know is how to turn that equity into lifelong financial freedom.
Yep. Another chapter where we say this is the most important thing.
I think this might be the most important chapter.
Well, we'll continue that theme with what could be very important or the most important thing next chapter 9, where we're going to go through taxes.
That might be the most important chapter of the book.
All right. I will see you, Jim, back here, chapter 9, when we talk about tax planning.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Make Rich Real podcast, where million-dollar businesses meet billionaire strategies. Please note the following disclosure. This podcast is provided by Dew Wealth Management, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as personalized investment advice, tax advice, or legal advice, or a recommendation to buy or sell any security. Nothing discussed in this podcast constitutes a solicitation or offer to provide investment advisory services to any person in any jurisdiction where such solicitation or offer would be unlawful under the securities law of such jurisdiction. All information presented is believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed for accuracy or completeness. All investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance, if mentioned, is not indicative of future results, and no investment strategy can guarantee profit or loss. Any mention of specific securities, investment strategies, or market performance is for illustrative purposes only and should not be considered a recommendation. Economic and market conditions are subject to change, and any opinions expressed are currently only as of the date of this recording. Before making any investment decisions, please consult with a qualified financial professional who can assess your individual circumstances, risk tolerance, and investment objectives. For more information about our services and fees, please refer to our ADV Part 2A, which is available on our website, dewwealth.com, or upon request.